This is No Set Path. I'm Drew English. Welcome back to the show. This week's guest is Noam Kroll. Noam is a Los Angeles-based narrative filmmaker known for his incredibly DIY approach to the craft. He reaches millions of filmmakers through his popular podcast Show Don't Tell, his newsletter Micro Budget Weekly, and his personal filmmaking blog, noamkroll.com. He's currently gearing up to release his third feature film, Disappearing Boy, and his fourth feature, Teacher's Pet, is currently in development. It's funded and slated to shoot this summer. Noam is someone I've been following for a really long time since I first got into filmmaking, and I'm so grateful he was able to sit down with me for this interview. We talk about a lot of different things, from running several creative businesses to building an audience, of which he has quite the large one, and of course, we talk about filmmaking and everything in between. Funny enough, this is a redo interview. We tried this a few months ago and had some issues with the video feed, and seeing as we're posting this to YouTube as well, we thought it made sense to just have a do-over. As always, if you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this show. And if you're watching on YouTube, a thumbs up on the video or subscribe to the channel helps us out as well. And now I'm so excited to bring my interview with Noam Kroll to you guys. Here we go. I really appreciate you jumping back on because we had the video issues the last time. So thanks again, Noam, for making time for me. You know, just to dive right in, because I have a bunch of stuff that I want to touch on with you. And I'm really excited to have you on because I've been following you for so long. So it's kind of like coming full circle. I would get to like pick your brain a little bit. I do want to give everybody listening like a little bit of background on you in terms of like where you started up to now in finding your way into filmmaking. And it could be specific to DIY filmmaking if you want to focus on that. However you want to position it's fine with me. But just a little bit of history of like where you came from to where you are now.
Totally. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate you letting me talk a little bit about some of the films and things I've got going on. But yeah, in terms of background and in my history, so I started as a filmmaker in Toronto. That's where I grew up. And I've have spoken about this with you previously, but essentially I learned very early that I kind of had to make my own films because as much as I enjoyed, let's say acting and doing other things when I was a teenager to try to get myself on sets or do whatever I could just to sort of express my creativity, I realized if I actually wanted to make my own films, especially when I was a teenager or something, like nobody's going to give me money, nobody's going to give me permission. And even things like film schools weren't that appealing to me as a path because I had this sort of background in acting, which was very limited, but it was something that I did for a few years because I was interested in it. It was another creative outlet, just like playing music or lots of other things that I did at the time. But it really seemed like this way to get access to sets and to kind of understand how movies get made. And, I did a few commercials and this and that. And I met some really, really great people along the way, including one director who advised me not to go to film school. Not that there's anything wrong with going to film school, but he just said, hey, look, if you're interested in other things too, maybe study something else and then bring that to your filmmaking. So that's kind of what I did inadvertently. I studied psychology, but the whole time I was really into filmmaking. So I would be sitting in my psychology classes, like writing scripts for short films and then shooting those, on the weekends with my friends. And while I was still in school, I managed to land a bunch of freelance work as a filmmaker, really, and I say filmmaker, but really a lot of it was corporate stuff, industrials or little local commercials and things I'd get paid, a couple $100 to do for a day. But I was really happy to be doing that because for the first time I realized, I could actually get paid to do something that I love doing. It's very different now. I live here in LA and, I see having kids as well now. It's completely different when you're exposed to the industry and you realize early on, this is a totally, viable career path. There's whole cities of people that work in the industry and there's so many types of jobs and different avenues you can explore. I didn't really have that experience. So I got wired in this DIY way from an early age where it was like, okay, film school's maybe not the right path for me. There's no, there's a lot of films that were shot in Toronto and commercials and things like that, but they were typically American films that were bringing in the cast and crew, or they were these very small Canadian productions. So I never felt that there was any sort of like existing mold that I could fit into. So I always had to just kind of find a way to make stuff. So that evolved from, making these like small short films and local commercials and things to creating a production company. And then that production company started doing larger and larger commercials. That was one of the things that helped me move down here to LA and just have a bit of a footing. And then once I was down here, which was about 10 years ago, that's when I started really, pounding the pavement and taking things seriously and making features and, doing all the, really upping my game in terms of like sharing what I was doing online. So we can get into all of that, but yeah, my path has been, as windy as anyone else's in this business. But that's sort of the gist of it.
Yeah. I mean, it really, really caters to like the point of this whole show, right? Is that, nobody's direction is the same as the next person's. I definitely vibe with the whole no film school approach because I'm self-taught as a filmmaker and learned by doing and just kind of immersing myself online too. So I totally get that. And when you and I have spoken previously about this, just going off the like coming to LA part, one thing you mentioned that we don't need to spend too much time on, but I found really interesting was that, from my perspective, I always would think that like a quote unquote smaller market like Toronto would be an easier place to like scale yourself as a filmmaker. And I think you mentioned to me the last time we spoke that your experience was the opposite. You came to LA where there's so much happening that yes, even though it's a place that's saturated with the film industry, you were still able to find plenty of opportunity for yourself because there's so much happening. So
Exactly.
I thought that was really interesting and kind of a fresh perspective on
Yeah.
that whole thing.
Totally. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because that is something that I've spoken about with people quite a bit over the years. And I think it applies to anyone who's coming from like a smaller market or overseas or wherever. And they're trying to determine like, is it better to be a big fish in a small pond or, a small fish in a big pond? And I think that's probably to an extent a personal decision. But I think for my personality, there's some amazing filmmakers and creative people that I know in Toronto who are actually doing very well. And I think the benefit to working in a small market, which is probably something I didn't talk about as much previously, although it's not really the path that I wanted to take, I do think there's a benefit for people who want to, like you said, rise up a bit quicker because I know people who are like several people who, I either went to high school with or I went to university with or this or that have risen up pretty quickly in the industry and are, deeping their, the biggest shows that they're shooting there or they're doing VFX on the biggest shows. And you can rise to that top if you're good pretty quickly, I think. I mean, relatively quickly. It might take you 1 decade instead of 3 decades here or
Yeah,
whatever, right? Because it's just so much smaller. However, the ceiling is much lower in terms of, what you're doing. At least that's how I saw it. So my feeling was always, look, if I'm going to do this, like I want to go all in. And I know even if I reach the top of what I could reach in Toronto or in Canada or in a smaller market, it's not that that wouldn't be, a good thing, but it wouldn't be what I was looking for. I really wanted to sort of make it here. And that didn't mean make it even in the traditional sense here, because I was never interested in, the studio system necessarily. I never want to direct Marvel films or any of this. Not that there's anything wrong with having those goals. It's just, no, I wasn't here because there's like the big Warner Brothers studios and all these things that you can go and work at and try to, find your footing in. But I always loved that there was just this abundance of opportunity and talent that's so concentrated in one place. There's, you throw a rock and you hit like 3 actors and they're all really good, and they could all be in your movie and they want to be in your movie. And there's cons, it's more expensive to shoot here. There's permits that are more, rigid. You can go down the list. There's definitely pros and cons, but yeah, for me, I felt like it was important to be here. And just to reinforce your point from before, I think for anyone else coming from a smaller market, the benefit of that is I found I had to work a lot harder to succeed in a smaller market because there was so much less opportunity there. Even in a city like Toronto, where there's a good amount of opportunity, it's not like nothing is going to be like here where there's just nonstop production. So by having to work in a smaller market and sharpen the skills, then when I came here, I felt like a lot of the things that I was doing, I was actually way ahead of where I thought I would be because not to say like I didn't have so much to learn still and
Sure.
continue to, but yeah, a lot of the things that I had to do just to move here, just to get a green card and a visa to live here and now citizenship, but like all the hoops I had to jump through, all the extra work I had to do, which I didn't like doing at the time, ended up sort of benefiting me. So I think that's the nice thing about being in a small market is you do have to figure out your own way. And then if you choose to move to a New York or an LA and that's something that you feel is right for you, not that it has to be, but then you have this resource and these skills that you probably wouldn't have developed in the same way if you were just, born in that place and you're exposed to the kind of the traditional systems really from the get-go.
I love that fresh perspective, and kind of the idea that you were coming to LA for the opportunity to work and develop your own projects, and you weren't coming specifically for the draw of like the studio system, for lack of a better term, which is just it's a little bit different than what most people do. Most people come because they want to like make it big, so to speak, and like be in those big films or work on those big films. And your take was a little bit different, which is totally awesome. I really appreciate that. And you were just coming basically for the pool of talent versus the already structured opportunities that were there. So that's super cool. We are going to make our way into your features that you've been working on, but something I really want to touch on is kind of how you've built, so to speak, from the ground up, right? I discovered you years and years ago. Like when I first was getting into filmmaking, I discovered your blog, right? It's a wealth of information. And I know you've since grown into like many different facets of the business, but you really started with the blog and building an audience. And as someone who's actively working to build their audience, and then I'm sure there's people out there who are doing so, what was it like starting the blog? How did you find that you were able to gain traction? And then, from there, thinking about like spinning off a podcast, which you also have, Show Don't Tell, which is another of my regular listens in my rotation. Just so curious about the whole like audience building process because you've been so successful at it, and continue to like tout the value of building and retaining your own audience.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I mean, you say that to me, I always feel like there's so much I'm not doing that like every day I wake up and there's 100 things I could and
Everybody
should be
feels
doing
like
to
that.
like,
The list
honestly.
never ends.
It
Yeah.
will never end. Yeah. So, just everyone should know that. But yeah, I think I did it in a way with like most things that I do, I tend to do things based on kind of like an instinct or an intuition more than knowing, why I'm doing it or having a specific business plan. With my blog in particular, things always start with like this one simple idea or solution. So like my blog, at the time, I'd come across like one or two other filmmakers that had blogs, and I valued it so much because when I launched my blog, I basically didn't know anything about, I'd made some little short films, but like I didn't really know what the difference it was of like a 50 millimeter lens and an 85 in terms of like, why would I choose one over the other, or like why would micro four thirds be a benefit sometimes over full frame, or these things that I was just starting to learn. I was learning them from these other sites, and I was learning other things quickly that weren't on those other sites. And I thought, you know what? This is cool. I'm just going to share it just kind of for fun. But this was right around the time that I was moving to LA, and I also wanted to just be searchable. So when I came here, if, I'm applying for green cards and this and that, if somebody types in my name, it's not just, some obscure IMDb page that nobody would know what to do with. So I built this blog, I posted, and everything I was posting, and still to this day, the strategy is just to post what I'm interested in. So at that time, the blog was very different from now in the sense that it was mainly like camera heavy and gear heavy because I didn't know anything at that point. So, okay, I'm going to start with gear. I'm going to start figuring out like, how to use the gear, what gear to use. I'm going to write about that. And then over time, oh, you know what? I'm spending a lot of time writing scripts. I should talk about screenwriting. Oh, I'm making a movie. I should talk about that. And then I'm not only making a movie, but I'm making it now, like skip to, many years later, I'm making these movies in very unconventional ways. So that might be interesting. So I try to just talk about the stuff I'm interested in. And, most people with blogs typically look at SEO traffic or analytics and they say, okay, like this performed well, so I'm going to do more of this.
Yeah.
And that will get you views. And I could have probably grown my site a lot faster if I did it that way. But the point of it wasn't just to grow a website. The point of it was really to have this, foundation for my career as a filmmaker where I could have my portfolio there. I could build a reputation. I could meet people like you and countless other filmmakers that I've now worked with. So it started as this very like organic thing. And I wish at the beginning I thought of it as strategically as I could have and actually said, in a way, in the sense that I could have, let's say, incentivized people to sign up for my email list, which I had 5 or 6 years of running this website with, hundreds of thousands, probably millions of people on the website. And I never thought to ask anyone to just sign up for a newsletter. And I later learned, okay, well, that would be very smart because now every person that comes on my site potentially could sign up. Even if 5% of them sign up, that's a lot of people. And that's a lot of people who might be interested in my movies or who might be interested in, courses or other things that I share. So, I wish I clued into a lot of that stuff earlier, but, when I did, it grew pretty quickly. There's about almost 70,000 people between my 2 newsletters now. I have one for my main site and one for Cinecolor. And that's where I sell my like post-production, not to plug it, but that's where I sell my, color grading LUTs and all that stuff. And I think that's actually a good example of learning how to grow a site, because what took me, 10 years to do with my main blog, I did with, Cinecolor in like 2 or 3 years. And now I'm actually getting more people subscribing to Cinecolor than to my personal site, by a pretty large margin. So
yeah, just to interject, I remember back when you spun off Cinecolor and you were like, I'm making its own separate entity, and just to watch, even if it's just from like the perspective of watching how the newsletter's grown or like the content's changed, or the fact that you're like running more, like creating more looks and post-production assets and like rolling them out more frequently. In the back of my head, I'm like, man, this must be like gaining some traction pretty quick. I mean, 3 years is not a long time, relatively speaking, to like grow quickly.
Well, I think so the nice thing with Cinecolor, and this might benefit you or anyone else who has a personal brand, if you want to call it that, but might also want to market products or services, is like, I don't really feel that comfortable marketing myself to filmmakers. Like, I don't want to send email blasts every day from my personal filmmaking, list and just sell people on courses. I want to make those courses and things available for people that could benefit and let them know every once in a while, hey, they're there if you want to check them out. But the nice thing with Cinecolor, because it's not my name on it, even though I send a lot of the emails and people generally know that I'm behind it, I feel a little bit more detached from it in the sense that I can have other people involved. I can have more traditional like marketing strategies. We send emails like almost every day now, whether it's to the whole list or whether it's to segments of the list, and we collect emails, we make products every day. And the profits from Cinecolor, in large part, are rolled back into Cinecolor, in the sense that now I'm really working hard to develop more proprietary technology, whether it's software, plugins, AI-based systems. Like yesterday, I was doing research on doing like an AI upscaler plugin, which I'm not sure if we're going to do or not. But like, my thing is, I'm always just looking for like, how do I optimize what I'm doing today, whether it's Cinecolor or my blog or whatever, but also like B, how does this evolve long term, where Cinecolor can be something that is not just an extension of my blog or whatever, but is actually a really powerful force in virtual post production, and that's offering tools. And that could be, I have no plans of selling Cinecolor anytime soon, but I want it to be the type of business where somebody would want to buy it. Whereas my noamkroll.com is my personal site. That's just my blog, right? So I can think about them very differently, which helps me, at least from like a business perspective.
Yeah, it helps you. Like the decoupling is super helpful. And I go, when I think about building a brand, right? I'm trying to like build up the quote unquote brand of this podcast. I'm also trying to figure out how I can contribute to the creative community without like, I don't want to be a guru or anything. And you're certainly not that. Like it's not in your makeup, and which I appreciate. Like I don't want the attention for that purpose. So, I definitely am on the same page with that. I think that's really good advice, is like having something that kind of decouples your name a little bit is really helpful. And also what you're doing is really, really smart, in my opinion, that I'm just starting to discover now. And I think is a little bit more in the conversation now with, post-COVID and production, especially now being quite a bit slower than it's been, taking a little longer to come back, and economic things, like all these kind of disparate factors, is you're really coming at things from like a business perspective, in the sense of, how can you diversify income,
Yeah,
and how can
exactly.
you always have something rolling through the door, so you don't wind up with all your eggs in one basket, which is hard to grow because it takes time to grow. But I think it's a really, really super smart approach. Just how you're building awareness, and how you're trying to diversify how you make money is super smart.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think that, just to underscore what you said, like if there's been one thing that's helped me just get through everything and succeed to whatever degree I had, it's been diversification in every single way. And I now I do it more consciously. I think early on, I'm just scatterbrained. So I just sort of diversified because that's my personality. Oh, today I want to freelance and color correct something for somebody and get paid hopefully a good rate. And then tomorrow I want to go post a blog. But now I can now look back in hindsight and actually create some kind of, somewhat of a system for myself where I can build diversification into everything I do. So that can happen on the micro level, and that can happen on the macro level. It could, on the micro, it could be, let's say, my blog posts, right? So diversifying the types of blog posts that I'm sharing, the types of guests that I have on my podcast. On the macro, it's like diversifying my income streams to make sure, at one point, almost all of my income only came from one source, which was my production company. And although it made really, decent money at a certain point, I felt like, well, I don't want all my eggs in that basket, because the bigger I grew, the more I would rely on a handful of small but wealthy, clientele. And luckily, I did diversify, because when COVID hit, at that point, I felt just completely lucky that I had, by no foresight of my own, really just luck, I had started these online channels, and I diversified my income to a degree where if I didn't have any production work, it actually wouldn't really matter. I wanted the production work, of course, because I want that business to grow too. But, I could fully, sustain my operations and overhead just with what I'm doing online. So that was very fortunate, that happened. And now that the production work has come back, I'm actually, I'm filtering it through a bit of a different lens. I'm taking on different types of projects. I'm working with a bit of a different system. So I'm a little bit less hands-on. But anyway, to your point about diversification, like, had I not diversified, I'm not sure what I would have done, let's say during COVID, or I'm not sure what, I would do when one thing is slow and the other thing is fast. It's just having multiple irons in the fire is important. The final thing I'll say, I can't remember who, I can't quote the person directly, but I've seen this quote come up a couple times recently. And someone had been talking about how in business, the biggest benefit that you can have, or that you can give yourself, is the ability to take a lot of, small bets on yourself over a long time. And that's something that I think plays into diversification as well, because it's like, businesses, right? Like you might come up with 10 different business ideas. One of those 10 might have the potential to be worth $50 million and for, Apple to come in and buy, right? But you won't necessarily know which one of those 10 it's going to be if you're still stuck on number one. And number one's not really working that well, but you're just beating your head against a wall trying to make it work, right? So it's like, how do you set up a system for yourself, a model or a little, whatever ecosystem to operate within that allows you to try 10 different ideas, or that allows you to make 10 different movies, instead of betting the house on the first one, which is almost never the one that is going to take off. So for me, that meant diversifying income streams, diversifying my efforts day to day so that like one day I can develop a new software product while I'm also making a new movie, while I'm also developing content channels. And it's a lot to juggle, but by doing a lot and spreading myself into those different areas, I can very easily measure what's working and over time prune away the things that aren't working and spend more effort and time on the things that are. But yeah, diversification is really the heart of all of it.
This episode is brought to you by Born Rival. Born Rival is a multidisciplinary brand that celebrates film culture and the use of visual media as a form of expression. Their products are made in the heart of New York City and are an extension of their storytelling spirit. In addition to apparel, they also produce original films and editorial spotlights that feature image makers and storytellers. As a brand, they're embracing the process of creating instead of focusing on the end frame or final cut. Visit bornrival.com to check out their recent collections and films, and be sure to enter code NOSETPATH at checkout to receive 20% off your first order. And now, back to the show. Wow. Okay. Well, there's a lot of a lot of really good takeaways in there. And one that I haven't heard before, one that we haven't talked about previously, is that idea of 10 business ideas, you never know which one's going to hit. So how can you set yourself up so you can whittle away a little bit at each one of those instead of going all in on one or two and leaving all the others to cook? I mean, that's really interesting. And this is like a really good segue, right? So let me just rattle off a few things here. You have your own production company. You have your blog site, which is your personal brand that you manage. You have Cinecolor, which is like post-production assets, color lookup tables, things like that. You also have the Backlot filmmaking community, which is a paid subscriber community that I also belong to. And then on top of that, you've created courses. You have a family. You've managed to live a real life. So I mean, it's a good segue into the idea or the conversation topic that's like, how do you manage your time? And I don't mean like, oh, well, I spend Tuesdays working on this business and I spend Wednesdays working on this business. I mean, down to the nitty gritty, like how ruthless are you with scheduling blocks of time for yourself? Like, how do you make all those pieces fit? To put it in perspective, I have one child and I'm a DP and also just running this podcast and trying to do a couple of other things. And it feels quite overwhelming. And you're just going for it with so many things. And you seem to hold it all together. So I'm just so curious down to a little bit more of a microscopic level. How are you just managing that and still having a life and a family?
Well, I think seem to be holding it together is the key, because I'm not always. I mean, I think the first thing I'll say is it's not easy. It's it's that there's that expression that I've probably brought up on my own podcast. Again, I can't remember who to attribute it to, but it's something like an entrepreneur is someone that will work 80 hours a week in order to avoid working 40 hours a week. And that's kind of how I'm wired. It's not always that I want to be grinding myself to the bone as I do, but But the alternative, like I never had a safety net, like I didn't have, I'm not some filmmakers have a trust fund and they just fund all these indie movies with
Yeah.
stars, and, they fund startup companies that might do well, might not, and they take a paycheck from that. Like, I didn't have any of those luxuries. I had to really work and find ways to survive on my own, and sure, I had plenty of, family support and other support along the way. Not that I didn't, but I've just always been someone who, like, as much as I diversify how I'm doing things, I want to go all in on, like, doing things kind of my way, in a way that works for me. So in terms of like scheduling things and efficiency and finding, there's really two aspects to it. So the one aspect actually isn't so much about the scheduling, it's about the simplifying. I can do a lot of things now because I've figured out ways to be very efficient with them and to sort of piggyback one thing off of another. For example, like if I have like when I'm more active on Twitter, if I spend a couple hours a week, writing tweets to help build audience through Twitter, that gives me content for that platform. But then I can capture screenshots from that. I can share those to Instagram. So I'm splintering content. Then I can analyze that at the end of the week and see like which content did well. And then that'll give me ideas for blog posts. And then I can easily write and expand on those blog posts because I already know where I'm going. I've already kind of thought it through. Or, other examples are if I'm making a film, like the last year and a half, I've been making this no budget feature, and I at every stage wrote down bullet points like, hey, we're doing the green screen, what's working, what's not. We're doing scheduling, what's working, what's not. And now I have this list of like probably 50, 60 different blog topics, podcast episodes that I can do like really quickly. That would, if I was just trying to do something from scratch, it might take me, a day or two to do a blog post, but I could probably do something more valuable in a couple of hours because I'm sort of piggybacking it off of something I'm already doing. So when I'm making a film, I'm actually not just making the film. I'm also thinking of ways to use that film as a marketing tool, to create other products from that film, like maybe a premium, this is something I'm planning to do with my film is like do a premium bundle with like behind the scenes stuff. I could extract color grading LUTs while I'm color correcting my film and then sell those on Cinecolor. So it's really, for me, like the half of the battle is just about like finding ways to be somewhat, clever with making, for every effort that I put in, deriving 3 or 4 or 5 different derivatives from that one thing. And that's even goes into how I look for opportunities and how I assess whether an opportunity is good. Somebody could offer me a high salary full-time job at a company, and people have over the years, and I've turned everyone down without thinking for a second, because that will benefit me maybe in one way monetarily, but it will actually hurt me in all these other ways. It won't allow me to explore these different things that I want to explore. So for me, whether it's making a film, whether it's starting a new business, whether it's, creating a new content channel, it always comes down to the question of, how, like for every 1 unit of time that I put into this, like how many units of like benefit, derivative am I getting back from that? And the one thing where like, when I make a film, I don't necessarily think of it that rigidly, because I try to be as artistic with that as I can. But at the same time, once I know what movie I'm making, then I can think like a producer too and say, all right, well, how do I make this, how do I leverage this opportunity in every possible way? Like if, you're taking a lemon and making lemonade, like there's always that little bit that you're not using at the end. Like maybe that can be something else, right? So I'm just trying to figure that out. And then the second part, sorry to ramble here, but it's a great question and something I think about often. So the second part of it is the actual nitty gritty of the scheduling. So what I do is every week, and actually a long time ago wrote a blog post on this. I have all the different like main kind of categories of what I do listed. So my production company, Creative Rebellion, Cinecolor, my blog, blah, blah, blah. And then on each of them, I assign them a label each week. And the label is either charge, explore, rest, or depending on the week. So most weeks it's either charge or explore. Sometimes it's a rest, and other times I'm just off completely. But I'll have, so for example, this week I'm really charging on my feature films because I'm finishing one and I'm writing another. So I know mentally at the beginning of the week, that's going to be the thing I spend most of my time on. Then there's going to be something that's, I forgot one category, which is maintain. It's charge, explore, maintain, and rest. So charge is like, what's the one thing you're going to go like all in on that week? And there can only be one for me. Explore is like, okay, I don't really have any time for this thing, but I do need to keep it going. And maybe I can't create a new LUT pack this week, but I can explore ideas. I can watch some movies and get inspiration, or I can test some looks in Resolve. I could do something small that will still keep the momentum going. And then, maintain is just the basics. Like this week, my content output, like I know the basics are, ideally I get a blog post up, a podcast up, a newsletter, and some tweets, and maybe a couple Instagrams. So that's my baseline. So if I'm not developing it beyond that point, that's just maintenance basically. And I should be able to maintain everything I'm doing at the same time, theoretically, with one charge. And then I have a rest because I think everything has to rest. Like I've been resting on my courses for a while because I'm thinking of new ways that I can reinvigorate them, add to them, market them differently. And time off is essential. So right now, while I'm pushing all these other things, I can kind of rest on that for a couple of weeks. So my weekly planning starts with identifying like what are the core things I'm doing, and then which ones am I focusing on in what way. And then from there, I just build out like a really basic, so there's one more step, not to be convoluted, but you wanted nitty gritty, so I'll give it to you. So,
I said it, yeah.
Top level. Then I'll break it down a little bit more from there. So then I have, like I said, the categories. So I'll take Cinecolor. All right, what's my goal for this week with Cinecolor? Like the overall goal, do I have to create new LUTs? Do I have to work with my developer on something, whatever it is? So I list that goal there. What's my goal for my content? If it's just to maintain, okay, well, list the specific blog post I want to write, the specific podcast I have to release, blah, blah, blah. And then I go through and actually make a weekly to-do list, and I do it Monday to Friday, and I go to each one. Okay, so I said for content, I have to maintain it. I know I need to schedule then one session to write the blog, one session to edit and publish. So I just start listing things down on the spreadsheet, or it's not spreadsheet, it's actually Workflowy is the app that I use. And then I just have a list, and day to day, I don't really care what order I get things done in. As long as I get everything done, then it's usually a good week. And if I don't get them done, it's usually not a good week. So that hopefully that answers it somewhere in that lengthy response.
Yeah, well, listen, actually, the lengthy response is good because it really illustrates that this is a lot of work, right? Yeah. And a couple of things. So really, it's all about developing efficiencies, right? And, stacking things as well. But you're also you've trained yourself over time to kind of think in a more efficient way. Going back to kind of earlier in that response where you're saying, if I'm color grading one of my films, I can, extract LUTs from that project, and then I can turn around and market those and sell those on Cinecolor. It's like that kind of thinking doesn't necessarily come naturally to everybody. It's like it's training and learning by doing, but you've like put yourself in this position where you can see multiple levels of opportunity through any one thing. And then also trained yourself on how to like double, triple, quadruple up on things from an efficiency standpoint that makes things as smooth as they possibly can be. But the length of the response totally illustrates that this is a lot of work, which, filmmaking is it's like a little bit weird, like the filmmaking community, because everybody just wants to like tout themselves as like this creative genius to some degree. It's like, look at these beautiful images I'm making. Like, oh yeah, I got hooked up with this project or with this agency and blah, 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 and make it seem like it's not a lot of work when, behind the curtain, it's like, it's a ton of work. especially when you're building these brands and these businesses for yourself and not relying on anybody else. Turning well-paying full-time job offers down flat. I totally respect that. I've done the same thing because that's giving up control of your own destiny, which I think is really important, especially for someone like you who's been down the road this long with it. So kudos to you on that. I do want to make sure we have time to to talk about your films, but that's a really great peek behind the curtain that that's super appreciated.
Yeah, no, and I'm happy to talk more about it too, because I think it's something, first of all, like I was never like that until I had to be. Like I started doing so many things. But one last thing I'll add to it, which might help, is like you could tell from doing this podcast, like I've had my podcast for like 5 going on 6 years. And I am literally talking to you right now on like the same little Amazon mic that I ordered, like no proper webcam. Like yours is probably going to sound like I should have it together by now, but like yours will sound better. There's more of an echo in here. You've got the headphones on, you've got probably a better mic, and not that is a good thing that I'm doing that, but I think that the one thing that I've learned is that I used to be more of a perfectionist, and when you're doing like 10 things, it's impossible to have, let's say, 5, 6, 7 different business ideas you're exploring, and to do them all like perfectly all at once, right?
Oh my God, absolutely.
My feeling is like, how do I do it as imperfectly as possible? And it's sort of like that idea from like the tech world of like, what's the minimum viable product? So like my podcast minimum viable product, the first episode, I think was me like just talking. I didn't even know, like, I don't think I'd ever listened to a podcast at that time. I was just talking into my Zoom recorder outside on my balcony. And it probably sounds horrible. I haven't listened to it in years. But it's, yeah, I mean, that's like a lot of things I do, or like, I know if I make a film for $6,000, there's going to be things I can't do. There's going to be things that go wrong, but there's also all of these benefits that I'm going to get from it. And then like now the movie, I've talked about this a bit on my blog and elsewhere, but like the movie that I'm going to make this summer is financed indirectly as a result of the movie I made for no money last year. So I could have easily not made that movie because, well, I don't have enough money, or it's not going to get done right, or I don't have like the perfect rig to shoot the background plates for the green screen shots. But you know what? Like if I did that, I wouldn't have a movie. Now I have 2 movies. So like it's the idea of like getting out of that perfectionist mindset where it doesn't help you at all. It only hurts you. And I don't know. I think for me that took a long time to get over, and that's the thing that's probably helped me the most in the last few years is just like letting go. And like a couple podcast episodes ago, I released one. My mic was like not even on, and it sounds terrible, but it was a good interview. So who cares? I'm gonna post it. In the old days, I've not posted it. So, anyways, yeah, I just adding that little tidbit to hopefully round off that conversation.
Well, it's the idea of like, in our world, it would be just go out and shoot it, or just go out and make it, or whatever. Coincidentally, Just Shoot It's another one of my favorite filmmaking podcasts, and I know you know those guys. So I'm going to bug you for an intro at some point. But for the record, my setup will probably sound better, but it's all stuff I had laying around because work was super slow, and I have a background in audio, and I'm also a DP, so it's like I just pulled crap out of my closet and set it up.
No.
So,
and not to say you shouldn't go. I mean, it's great to go the extra mile, but I just mean we all have our things where like, yeah, there's the things where you focus on where it's easy for you. Like for me, it's the same thing. Like there's certain things with a film where I could get production value, and it might appear like I'm going the extra mile, but I'm really just using my resources well. And then there's other things where it's just, I have to pick and choose my battles, and this is not the hill I'm going to die on. I'd rather
for sure
get this done than get it perfect, kind of thing. But
totally, and I think that's all valid and super important, and like perfectionism can really just kill the momentum of things too. So I think that's really valid advice. But let's for sure talk about films. I mean, we've talked about this no budget, or you might call it micro budget, but I know you did it for like probably less than micro budget feature, and that's Disappearing Boy, correct? That's the title?
Yes. So that's
Okay.
the title. That's the one we did last year.
Yeah, and what I know about it is just what I've seen online, that it's basically made for no money other than you feeding actors and like paying for absolute necessities. You shot it all on a Fuji X-T4,
Yep.
which is I'm talking to you on an X-T3, so I'm familiar.
Oh,
And you
nice.
shot, yeah, and you shot it on one lens and all pretty much on a tripod, and that's about all I know. So if you want to like unwind a little bit of like what that film, what the
Yeah.
process of making that film was like, that would be great, because that's in a world where we're in an industry that's constantly making you think you need the biggest, best, most expensive stuff to make a great product. I can speak from my own eyes that seeing some of the frames that you've been posting, this looks outrageously good, and done with very, very minimal build out. So like tell us about Disappearing Boy.
Yeah, well, thank you again. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, so I'll tell you kind of how it started. Was I'd made a few other features. I'd made really two at the time that I completed and released. One was called Shadows on the Road, another Psychosynthesis, and those were both movies that were done for anywhere from like 15 to 25,000, very micro budget. But I kind of shot them in a more traditional way, where we had crews. We had, there was a 10-person crew roughly on the last one I did, Psychosynthesis. And, we scheduled it kind of more traditionally and whatever. And it worked. We got it done. But I was looking at, okay, what's next? And it's either going to be I go much bigger or I do something different. And I decided I don't want to actually go bigger yet, because I felt like as much as I had benefited from the micro budget realm, I never really fully went all in on it. Like I never did the thing I always wanted to do, which was make a movie kind of by myself, just with actors. I wanted to see what that would be like and if I could pull it off. And I felt like, for all the things, the skills that I don't have, all the things that I still need to learn, all of my weak points, like I have these strengths that I'm not really leaning on. I'm a good jack of all trades. I like operating a camera. I can record good sound, can edit my own movie. So why not? If I'm ever going to do it, why not now? It's only as I get older, less and less likely that I'm going to do something like that. So I had this idea, and basically from the get-go, it was keep it as much to like as close to zero as possible. Had I, some people make movies with friends, like actor friends, and their partners on the movie, and they all share. And if it were that sort of arrangement, the budget would literally be like $300. I
Right.
just chose, even though the actors, are now friends of mine and really enjoy working with them. Like I wanted to pay everyone. So like, they got a rate basically equivalent of what they should get through like SAG, ultra low budget. And that was the budget. And it was done in this very unconventional way where so I came up with the idea, wrote like a treatment. I sent it to the actors just to get their feedback. They really liked it. And then I decided I'm actually going to write this in phases. So I'm going to write the first act and then we'll shoot that. And I figured, like, let's say we do 12 shooting days total for the main shoot, which is almost exactly what it ended up being, plus like 5 or 6, extra B-roll days. So for those main 12 days, I had to figure out what is what's the workflow going to look like? Maybe, if it's 4 acts, act 1, 2A, 2B, and 3, each can be a 3-day shoot. So I actually built this script around the production requirements. And I said, okay, I have this story I like. I'm just going to write the first act. I'm going to make sure we can shoot that first act in 3 days. And then we're going to schedule that soon. And so like within a month of having the idea, we were already on set for the first day of shooting. Took a couple weeks off, I think. And then we did the next 2. Then I took like 2 months off and I just looked at the footage and I thought about the story. I didn't even do that much editing, which I planned to do. I did a little bit, but I mainly just thought about it. And then, okay, I've got the next act. So I'm going to write that, send it to the actors, got their feedback, revised it, let's go shoot, book the locations. And that made it so much easier because it was basically like I was making a bunch of little short films instead of making one feature film. And those short films were easier than actual short films I've done that have had full crews, because instead of, having this big call sheet and we're sending it out to like all these people and hoping people show up on time, the parking is arranged and this and that, it's me texting the two actors who are boyfriend and girlfriend already sitting next to each other on the couch, like, hey, do you guys want to meet in Malibu at 9 tomorrow? And we'll go, like, I posted this on Twitter, but like one of our shoot days, it was my favorite one, was we had to shoot at the beach. So I texted them the night before. I was like, let's meet in Malibu at 8 a.m. or whatever. We meet there. We go and sit for like brunch for, 2 hours and just talk about the movie, just the three of us. And I'm holding my little camera, like our production thing is like sitting, in my lap. And then we just go and like, okay, we need a good vista. So let's go walk down to the cliff in Point Doom and climb all the way up, find the nicest looking spot. And now we'll spend a few hours shooting the movie. And then we basically only spent 3-4 hours shooting that scene, but it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It looks the best in the movie. And it was so much better than if we were just like, oh, we're here, the AD is telling us to go, let's just start shooting now, and whatever's on the page we're going to shoot. Like, we took our time, but we still finished early. It was like those sort of things. So, that probably paints a picture a little bit of the production. And then, the story itself is like a kidnapping thriller. And part of that was my son, who was at the time 2.5 when we started shooting it. I was like, oh, he's going to add a lot of production value to this movie, because it's so hard to get a 2.5-year-old in a movie. So I have to use him. That was part of the reason I went for the kidnapping thriller. But I also knew like it's going to be a nightmare to film him the whole time. So I have him in an opening scene and he disappears. And then we have these like little moments with him throughout. And then, there's more later on in the third act where you see him again. So I was able to kind of like, leverage my resources, including like my own kid, but then schedule it in a way where like we shot over the course of a year. So, and the movie is supposed to take place over a year-long timeline. So I was able to have, so like I have his opening scenes where he's like really young, and then we see him a year later, and then he looks a year older. So it was like kind of stealing from Linklater's playbook a little bit.
I was just going to say, how very Richard Linklater of you.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so that's sort of the gist of that. And now it's edited and, hopefully we'll hit some festivals soon.
That's really cool, man. It's taking like the filmmaking convention and just kind of flipping it on its head, right? And because, the conventional way of making a film oftentimes feels to me like you're just trying to jam a bunch of creativity into this predetermined like schedule or structure, whatever you want to call it. It's like, typically it's like, this is when we're going to shoot it, and we've planned out all our locations and blah, blah, blah. You've done all the pre-production, and then you've designated this window of time as the window of time that we need to make magic happen within. Which like, it doesn't really work like that, creativity. So I love that you've flipped that whole thing on its head. Took a year to make the movie, but, shot an act at a time, took months off in between, had a chance to really refine the process based on what you'd already created. And it's just like the pace is so much different. And I think in a lot of ways more efficient and effective for turning out a really great, like creative product in the end. And, because we're creeping up on an hour, I want to make sure we kind of touch on the next project. But like you took a different approach with this film, basically spent no money on it other than paying actors and buying food. And this has now directly influenced getting funding for your next feature, which is Teacher's Pet, that you're writing and directing. And you dropped a bomb, like I think it was a couple of weeks ago at this point, that this got picked up in Variety. So like you're mentioned in Variety as the writer and director, like that gets a lot of eyeballs on it. Like that's a big, big deal if you're in the filmmaking world. So I guess I want to know a little bit about what you can tell us about Teacher's Pet. and how that whole project came to fruition and how the variety thing happened. And just, I think it's just like giving a little insight to like, you weren't afraid to do something different in your own way with Disappearing Boy. And now that's really had an impact on the next feature, Teacher's Pet. So if you could unroll that for a little bit.
No, for sure. It's a great question. And yeah, to sort of connect the dots. So I made this film, and because I made the film, I was sharing a lot about it along the way. People were learning about it. And a referral came through from a friend who caught wind of a lot of the things I was sharing online pertaining to the last film, and put me in touch with this producer slash financier slash distributor, Sheldon, who's excellent, who I've been working with. And he essentially said, I'm looking to produce some movies. He wanted me to pitch him some ideas. So I did. And he really liked one of them, which was, fleshed out already. So I got him a treatment, and he essentially, decided to partner up with me, thankfully, on this film. And it's been really great because, so the film itself is also very much like a thriller. I wouldn't say it's a horror, but it delves into that genre territory quite a bit. It's about a very sort of underdog type character. She's an 18-year-old student at this high school, underprivileged, surrounded by other people who are wealthier and have these other opportunities. And she has to sort of break out of this, and also lives in this like abusive foster care home. And, there's a whole backstory. And really the narrative is all about her dynamic with this new writing teacher that comes in, who appears at the beginning to be this very charismatic, very positive force, but she quickly learns is essentially a sociopath. And while she begins as like the teacher's pet, quickly it flips. So it's this very kind of crazy, fun idea. And it's going to be shot in a way that's kind of a hybrid. So after what I learned from making the last movie, there's just certain things that I can't unsee that I have to do again. Like there's certain aspects of how small we kept it, how we scheduled things, et cetera, that we have to keep. And then there's certain things like for this particular movie that we don't have to keep, or that we shouldn't keep, because I'm a big believer that like, even if something worked, that doesn't mean it's going to work again, or that doesn't mean you should not try other ideas too. So like this movie, I can't schedule over the course of a year because it's just not going to work that way location wise. But I can keep the crew really small. I can, take all of these other kind of learnings from my last film and bring them over to this new one. So I think it'll be a really interesting kind of hybrid model where it's really small and scrappy, but we also leverage these other resources as we have already to, just bring really interesting people on board. And something we're exploring is actually casting a name actor in one of the roles, which I haven't done in my other films. So things like that will shape, the film in a different way than my previous movies. But yeah, I'm just always trying to kind of learn from these and see, not that I ever think there's like one model that will work, but just try to get as close to what that idealistic version of making a movie actually looks like,
Yeah, I love that you're sticking to your guns and like taking learnings from previous projects and applying what you can to this particular situation. I mean, no two projects are ever going to be the same. A lot of times people try to capture lightning in a bottle twice. If you set down the road trying to do that, you're going to fail because it's just not how it works. But taking learnings and taking the things that you can't unsee or unlearn from previous experiences is totally worth it. And I just love that it's, already starting to get some buzz and like all the efforts paying off. Like, how did the Variety like little write-up happen? Or was that just kind of like a out of the blue sort of thing?
Well, to me, it was out of the blue. I sort of knew that it was going to maybe be mentioned, but that was no effort of my own. That was just my producer, Sheldon, who I don't actually know how he got it up there. I think he probably has, PR people and people that he works with to do press releases. And the article was also centering on some, a group of films. So one of them was Teacher's Pet. There's other films that he's producing and talking about his company. So, really that was that was all him. However, I do plan to explore a lot of opportunities for future press by submitting. Now I have contacts at other trades directly myself, and I've never gone out and like pitched myself to like, oh, here we're doing this, and do an article on Deadline or whatever. But that stuff really actually can move the needle, as I'm learning now, and does make a difference. So as we start to do things like, okay, let's say we do book a name in one of the roles, that's something where we could now have a path through, various means to go and pitch it to these publications and say, hey, so-and-so is on board the project, or, there has to be something that's somewhat like newsworthy about it.
Yeah.
Whether it's a big actor involved, or in the case of the last one, like the launch of a new company that's notable, or that sort of thing. So, but what I will say is, as nice as it is to have these like mentions in the trades or whatever, and it can help. Like I think if you're really highlighted on your film and you win Sundance or something and you get a nice write up like that, that's obviously going to get really noticed. But at the end of the day, really, like that stuff happens as it did with my own experience, like without your knowledge sometimes and without your effort. Like the things that seem hardest to achieve because they seem the most unattainable, it kind of goes back to like our conversation earlier. Sometimes those things, like it's not like you can just work your way into it. It's just right timing. Like, okay, I made this film with the right person at the right time, and they're promoting something, and we can, help spread the word about this movie. And that's what happens when you're making stuff, is you benefit from these like random things that come up, that you can't necessarily plan for.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's luck kind of plays into everything, and some people are going to say that like, oh, luck is bullshit and whatever. And it's like, so one term I ran across recently, which I kind of really like, is luck surface area, and it sounds really businessy, but really what it is it's like, if you're trying to fabricate luck, if you're one of those people who doesn't believe that it just happens randomly, then it's like the concept of do more as good as you can, and spread out the amount of, like, in this case, creative real estate you take up with all the different things that you're working on. And then your luck surface area increases because you're putting more out into the world, and you're, just have more irons in the fire, that kind of thing. So I really kind of dig that. I do like that there's that little bit of luck component. It's like, you get the right person attached, or you meet somebody who you hit it off with and they are connected with somebody else. And like those random things still happen. But when they do happen, I love that you're taking that thing that you can leverage and, again, doing it in your own way. For example, we've already had you on the schedule for this podcast, and, in the rotation, we've been talking about it for a while, but not too long ago, in an effort to promo Disappearing Boy, I believe it's to promo Disappearing Boy.
Yeah.
You put out an ask in your newsletter where it's like, if anybody reading this is a content creator, you have a blog, a podcast, whatever, the scale didn't matter. It was like, I want to talk to you, and you want to like deliberately make sure you're getting out there into like smaller audience segments. And I think it's really, really smart, man. I think it's really smart because everybody always wants to be moving up all the time. And not that you're, I don't know how to say it in like the most positive way possible, because you're not like going down a tier, because I don't want to knock like smaller creators. Like, I'm a smaller creator. Nobody knows who I am, but it doesn't matter. It's like, it's like you're spreading yourself out, right? You're trying to hit more touch points. I think it was so super smart. And I've never seen anybody do that before, like intentionally go for smaller audiences. But, it's the idea.
I'll hit way more. Oh, sorry to interrupt you, but for me, it's just, I look at the actual numbers. So you take the ego out of it. So the ego tells you like, oh, go after variety, and that looks cool to people, and you post on Instagram, everyone gets all excited. But like this interview with you, and then, I've scheduled about like 20, 25 interviews with other, and they range from people that are just starting YouTube channels to somebody that's had a podcast for, years and has a good audience. But, for me, it's like, I don't really care about the size. I know that I understand the way that like interviews and things can reach people online, and
Yeah.
it's way greater than variety. Like variety looks cool, but I know that I will reach just through this interview alone. I will probably reach more people than through that article, and through all the other ones I'm doing, it'll be that times 10 or 20. And then I'll hopefully be able to link back to you, link back to everyone, bring more people your way, which in turn will bring more people, eventually, hopefully back my way as your audience grows. So like, it's just this mutually beneficial thing. And yeah, I just never believe in like doing the thing. Okay, so this is the thing you said before that I'll come back to, is like you were talking about how, sometimes you see DPs or people that are like, oh, I got signed with this agency and there's these big milestones. And you were talking about how like a lot of time it is hard work, and that's true. But a lot of times it's not hard work and it is luck. And sometimes it looks way better than it is. Like sometimes somebody gets signed by the hot agency because their
Totally.
cousin, is dating the assistant to somebody there. And they're like, oh, look, I got signed to CAA or whatever. But then, skip to 3 years later, they've been sent on 2 or 3 general meetings and haven't made a thing. And it actually hurt them to get signed because it gave them this false sense of security. And they were probably advised not to do smaller projects, not to do this, not to do that. So they're playing somebody else's thing. So a lot of times when we see, whether it's like a Variety article, not, with me or anyone else, like half these movies that are mentioned on Deadline never get made, but people post them
Sure.
online like, oh, this is the next big thing. So I like to just look at like, what's the reality? Like in reality, I can like reach more people and get my film in front of more people through smaller indie filmmakers and actually build a community there, as opposed to just being one of like a million other people that just wants my ego boosted by getting another, Variety mention or something, which I do.
Yeah, I
It happens, but it's just not what I'm seeking.
yeah, totally. Ego is a concept that comes up a lot in these interviews, because I'm talking to creatives, and the people I talk to are well adjusted, and everybody kind of recognizes that like ego is a thing that's going to play a role. It's just how you manage it. So I think that's
Yeah.
really smart. I love the idea of like the everybody wins mentality, where it's not just about you getting as high in the ladder as you can. It's about like the community as a whole, and everybody wins, like
Yeah,
a rising tide raises all ships kind of thing.
exactly.
I do want to wrap this up, but kind of my last question, I'll roll into it this way, is the first interview we did, which had video issues, we talked about like compound interest as it relates to audience building, right? And
Oh,
so
nice.
as a
Yeah.
segue, what you're doing with going for a variety of podcasts or YouTube channels or creators that have whether it's 100 people or 100,000 people. I mean, that's not the point. It's like you're trying to like diversify your audience base, and as an effect, that's hopefully going to like compound your audience retention. And we had talked the last time about how growing an audience or an email list or whatever from a couple of hundred people to say like the first 1,000 is the hardest part of the journey with that. So, and I'm in that now. Like I haven't spent any time really digging into growing a newsletter, or email list, whatever you want to call it. And that's something that I'm starting down the road with now. So I guess my last question to kind of top this off would be, as someone who has spent a very long time building and curating an audience and is now starting to reap the rewards of all this like compounding over time, do you have any advice for those listening if they're just looking to start building their own audience? Like what's the 1 or 2 things you would start with right away?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So, like in the context of compounding, which really means staying in it long enough. Like we probably got into this analogy with just finance. Like if you put your
Yeah.
money in an investment account, it's like, what's the Warren Buffett expression? Like the only rule of compounding is like never unnecessarily interrupt it, right? So like you put money in the stock market, it might go way down, don't touch it, it's going to go way up one day. And if you touch it, you're taking it at a loss, right? So you wait and wait and wait. It grows a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And then all of a sudden, oh, it starts kicking up, and then it starts going exponential. And that's what happens with everything in life if you give it enough time. So we talked about luck. So many filmmakers want to be lucky with their first film, and they're not, even if it's a great film. Oftentimes it's not the perfect film and they need more time to develop their skills. Sometimes it is a perfect film and it's just not in the genre that Sundance or whoever wants that year, or there's, they don't know the right people. So, how do you, like you said, expand the surface area of luck? How do you then also use that, get there by compounding your efforts over time? So I think, the advice that I would have is look for things that are the small wins, I guess I would say. I know a lot of people talk about this online, but I really believe in it too, is like, if you're doing, like, I'll give my film as an example. So like my film took 18 months in total, from like idea to shoot to edit, everything, color. If I had just looked at it as like one big thing, I would have been discouraged so many times. I would have quit. I've made other films and quit halfway because I was just didn't think it was going well. But when you look at the small steps and, with the little wins at each stage. So like, okay, I just finished a page of screenplay today. Like I didn't have that yesterday, just one page, but I didn't have that. And that's this little step that if I take another one tomorrow, I'm going to have a feature film at the end of this. It's not a million steps at once. It's a bunch of small little baby steps. And so you have to find the things that are rewarding to you, that you can either measure or that get you excited in the meantime, because those big things aren't going to pay off for a long time, and may never pay off. Hopefully they will. But the point isn't for them to pay off. The point is to enjoy it now. And that sort of brings me to the other point, I guess, that goes hand in hand with this is that you have to choose things that are actually things that you're interested in and you want to be spending your time on anyway. Like I chose to do a podcast instead of a video thing. I don't mind being on camera right now, but if I'm editing my own thing, I'm going to take probably way longer because I know my perfectionist mentality. So, okay, I'm going to choose an audio thing. It's easier for me to edit. I'm going to choose to make a certain type of film because it's a topic I'm interested in, not because it's a topic that I think is going to like sell, or because some, AFM panel told me to make a certain type of movie because then they can, it'll bolster their catalog. It's really about like, focusing on sort of what is right for you, and how you want to be spending your time, because it's so cheesy. It always comes back to this thing, but it's true, which is why it's a cliche, which is that like the process is the reward. And that is the thing. Like, I promoted a little bit like Rick Rubin's book, just non-paid, just because I love it. The Creative Act. Have you read that book?
Oh my God. I'm in the middle of it right now. And I thought it was going to be like, I didn't know anything about it. So I picked it up and I thought it was going to be a memoir. And I started reading it. I'm like, oh my God, it's like a meditation on creativity. It's incredible.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
So it really is like one of the best books I've ever read. And I've read a lot of books on creativity. It's up there though, like with The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I'm just such a fan of it.
It made me feel so much less alone as a creative person. It was great.
It's really, I couldn't recommend it more. And like, he talks about all of this in the book, and he talks about, one other thing actually he talks about, this is sort of off topic, but I was going to bring it up before, is and this I guess relates to the ego discussion, is, I'm not sure if you got to this point, but he talks about like getting rid of labels. And I've been thinking a lot about that. I wrote a thing on Twitter about this too, how like, we all like want to be the director, or we want to say we've like written and directed this, we want whatever. But like at the end of the day, like the label then dictates how we go after the goal, and then creates a goal that might not even be aligned with what we want to do. Like I direct films. I don't really care if people call me a director. I don't care if they call me a business owner or not. Like I own a business. Like I've made films. So like I know I am a filmmaker. I know I'm an entrepreneur. whether I call myself for that or not is irrelevant. And the more I label myself one thing, the more I'm going to do things for the wrong reasons, or because I think there's like a set path or a set method to do something in. I'd rather just think, to his point, like, I'm just an artist. I'm just living. I'm just a person. Like, I'm not, don't have to even call myself an artist. I'm just a human being that is making decisions that I think are the right ones in the moment. And I think that's what you can do. Again, like even with the compounding stuff we're talking about, is like, you want to work on a business, a content channel, a movie, whatever it is, like, don't think of it from the label perspective of like, what are people going to say if I do this? Or does this make me sound more professional? Or just think about like, what do you enjoy doing? Because if you can stick with anything, like people make millions of dollars a year doing the most obscure things nobody's ever heard of, or like designing, like zippers, or, like you could make
totally
money
true,
and
yeah.
find success literally doing anything. But most people don't get there because they won't commit for long enough. If it's not successful in a year or 2 years, they quit. And you're only going to keep going if it's something that, you actually love. So that's end of my rant.
You're a wise man, Noam Kroll. Very wise. Yeah, I mean, just try to get to, I don't know if you've read Atomic Habits, but it's like the concept of like, get 1% better every day. And if that's all you can do, then that's all you can do, and find something you like and stick with that, and just, little victories along the way.
Yeah.
Dude.
I love that you're reading the book. That's awesome. I hope
I'm like, I want to go pick it up right now that we've, had this conversation. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on, and coming back to like redo our interview. But now more life has happened, so I feel like it's even more substantive at this point.
My fault. I botched our first recording. I had my camera off, so it was my fault. But go ahead.
It's okay. It's okay. You did great. You didn't touch a thing this whole time. I'm very impressed.
I taped my hands to the desk.
So we're going to say a proper goodbye after I stop recording. But for everybody listening, thank you for tuning in and getting a splash of wisdom from Noam Kroll. And I'll make sure, Noam, that we put a bunch of links in the show notes. But if there's anything for those who are driving around the subway, any place on the internet that you can be found that you want to pitch here, please go right ahead.
Sure. Yeah, just the hub of everything's just my blog, noamkroll.com, NOAMKROLL.com. And then if you do noamkroll.com/newsletter, you can sign up for my personal weekly newsletter, and my site's connected to social media, Twitter, Instagram, all that kind of thing. But again, thank you so much for having me on. This was so much fun. And, we'll definitely flip it next time and have you on Show Don't Tell as well.
I'm all about it. Love it.
All right.
Big fan. Thanks, Noam. All right, there you have it. That was my interview with Noam Kroll. A huge thank you again to him for being on the show. Head on over to noamkroll.com and check out what he has going on. If you want to find out more about this show, you can head to nosetpath.com or find us on Instagram at nosetpathpodcast. And if you want to learn more about me, your host, Drew English, you can find me at drewenglish.com or on Instagram at drewenglish with 2 H's at the end. Stay tuned for more great guests. We have some really excellent people lined up for future episodes. And until then, we'll see you next time.